Good, that's good indication. Now, as I mentioned, or may have mentioned before, the program for today is as basic as it can be. How many of you got into ham radio maybe the past few months or year or two? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So several of us are what I would call myself, if I were in your stage, I would call it the novice stage. Even though we don't have a novice class, we are still learning basics about radio. So I hope this will be, if not informative, it will be entertaining for you guys. It's been really fun for me to think about the basics of radio when I was in 1952, just thinking about being a new ham. And so, thanks to Henry, who provided some of the technical backup, we're going to have a little discussion and demonstration about basic radio and what we're really trying to do. There might even be some things in this presentation that are on an examination, a tech exam. How about that? So I've had a lot of fun building these, what looks like T-squares, but really this is an antenna with a feed line. We won't be talking about the feed line today. That's more of Henry's area in the next month or two. But next month, by the way, the presentation will be on basics of building PL259 coaxial connectors and things like that. And we'll move into transmission lines and coax cables and various things like that in the next couple of months. So, can you all see that display, or am I covering it up with this? I'll take this down, put it on the ground. So the next slide shows questions about what we're trying to achieve. See if I can remember how to advance the slide with this gadget.
Aim it towards the computer.
Aim it towards the computer. Right up here?
No.
Okay, that computer, okay. Down one.
That's the right one.
This is the
That's not the right.
this is the Epson control.
There's a control over on the computer.
Yeah, I saw it. I just need to be reminded. Thank you. First time to operate this year. There's another.
There you go.
I got you covered. Go on.
You got me covered, okay. So, what's the idea in building an antenna for the first thing? What is your antenna supposed to do? Radiate a signal. Well, that begs a lot of other questions. What does it mean to radiate a signal? There's an invisible manifestation, an invisible thing that goes out. We think of it as physical, but you can't touch it. It just influences the electrons in our bodies or in our wires around us. It's called an electromagnetic wave. We're supposed to radiate electromagnetic waves. You and I do it too in our own way, but we're talking about things that come from antennas right now. So what makes an antenna work the best? How do you get the biggest signal, most bang for your buck from the antenna? Height helps. Resonance, what in God's name does resonance mean? It really maximizes the current or the voltages in the antenna. You want to have maximum current. More electrons going in the antenna means more radiated waves, more radiated power. More signal going out, and also by the reverse logic, more signals received, louder signals received. So that's what you want to do, is maximum what the antenna is doing. Take a given transmitter and maximize the current in the antenna. You're doing a worthwhile job. Maybe there's even a little laser pointer here, is there? In this gadget? Well, anyway. Yes. Henry's going to talk more about how you maximize that energy in the antenna too. But if I were you, I might have the question, why is this piece up here called a dipole? Dipole is the word used most of the time for this antenna. It has two ends, 1 and 2, where nothing is connected. Well, we'll see a picture that'll give you an idea, but basically there are how many kinds of electrical charges? If you see my fingers, better count to 2. So there's 2 kinds of charges, positive and negative. It's a tough historical question to really ask how did they get those names, positive and negative, but there's probably a historical reason. I'm not expert in that. I just did the physics of it and not the history. But, so an antenna like this likes to get charged both ends. And they're opposite charges if it's doing its thing. And it gets positive and negative in one half the cycle, and then it gets the reverse charges, negative and positive, the other half the cycle. And you want to maximize those charges and maximize the current in order to make the antenna do the job the best. Right? So, it's a dipole because there are two kinds of charges. Why they used D delta rather than B bravo, I don't know. It could equally well be called a bipole. It's a bipolar device. But somehow we got saddled with the D delta rather than the B bravo. Maybe you know the historical reason behind that. And I would learn from you. Now, and the interesting thing is, this length is kind of magical. It makes the antenna be most effective at a particular part of the radio spectrum on the dial. There is kind of a rude example of another system that's resonant like this. How many of you have seen the Bay of Fundy and the coast of Maine, or coast of Canada up there? There's a wonderful resonance that occurs up there, a tuning of the water cycle, which makes the waves of the ocean maximize there, providing for 50-foot tides, just because that particular 200-mile stretch of the Bay of Fundy is tuned to the natural rotation rate of the Earth. And so we get maximum current, maximum tides. Well, what you want to do is maximize the tides of electricity in this thing. That's what you're doing, is by tuning the antenna. It really is a tide going back and forth, like a bathtub being shushed by a person waving his or her fingers in the bathtub. But this is a rather high-frequency bathtub, waving back and forth 150 million times a second, rather than just slowly like you could see. So, you want to, and that length really depends, because these things happen at the speed of light. So you adjust this length so that it maximizes the current when you're vibrating that current at a certain rate of time, certain rate. Anyway, we're going to explore the effect, and now we're going to do this experimental science here of seeing what the impact is. I've got two antennas here that are very similar. If you look really careful, at the top length you see that one is about 3 inches longer than the other. Can you see that maybe? The one is about 3 inches longer than the other. And I deliberately tuned one off the 2-meter band. It's a little bit too long. So always, if you're doing a tuning job, it's better to start long, because it's easier to cut off parts than to tape them back on again. Yeah. So if you're doing a tuning job for the first time, start with long pipe or start with long wire and trim it down until you get it tuned the way you want. And that comes from the equation. Let's see, I think I have more of this presentation here. And you're going to move that on. This just reviews what the antenna looks like, maybe in certain situations. And here you've got a model of the dipole there with a left-hand and right-hand side, which looks like ours. And there's a feed line here, which we will not discuss today. There is a little bit of magic that goes with this length of wire, but I've tuned it nicely because this feeder is what we say is unmatched to the antenna. But by making this a half-wave long, we can forget the mismatch at this end, because it's a half-wave matching transformer and makes it look just like the antenna at this point. Handy for making measurements. So, next slide, please. Thanks, James. Here's an example of why a dipole is a dipole, with the currents maximized in the center, voltage maximized at the end, high voltage on the left, high voltage on the right, but the polarity is different, plus and minus on the two ends. Dipolar action. Our idea is to tune the antenna so you maximize those currents. There. And we're going to the next slide. There we go. This is an example of something like a flute, which works on a resonant principle too. Its length depends upon that. And you see the frequency. This is the big equation here. This could be the velocity of light if we're talking about antennas like that. And this is the wavelength down here, 2 times the length. Because you see there's a half wave in this part and a half wave in the other part. So the half wavelength is kind of the magic length for the dipole. So next slide, thank you. Okay, so here we go. This is an approximate calculation for the speed of light. Wavelength is represented by this little lambda. And this is the speed of light, C. Many textbooks use C for the speed. And I put in numbers here for 146 megahertz. Middle of the 2-meter band. You know that from your handy-talkie. Do the division between the speed of light, all in meters, and divide by the frequency in hertz or cycles per second. You come out with about 2 meters as the wavelength. And so the half wavelength is roughly 40 inches. About 40 inches. So we have an antenna here that's about 40 inches long, but I deliberately made it a little bit long. And let's make a measurement on this for the fun of it. This is where we approximate. And Henry has this wonderful meter which measures the standing waves as connected down below here. And we have a nice plastic box.
In real time.
Real time, yep.
This just proves Dave's math is correct, by the way.
And
I think
Henry
they
let
did
me
a
come
really
over to his
nice
house
job
and
on
play
this.
with these things. One time we had a couple of good meetings. Really fun playing with this stuff. He made this nice measuring jig.
This is the long one?
That is the long one. So he's going to find, I trust he's going to find a resonant frequency by looking for minimum standing wave ratio. Perhaps he'll say more about standing waves in another meeting in a month or two. Okay, this is basically, it's okay.
Yeah, the antenna's still fine. You can leave it there so I can get it closer to the... Can everybody see this meter, at least in the
I don't
front
want to
row
be
here?
holding on to this.
Can you guys see what the needles are? Okay, right now the SWR at 143.187 is a 4, and the impedance is looking at about 50 ohms. So our SWR is not bad. Closer to 1 is better, right? So Dave cut this antenna a little bit longer, so if it's longer, that means the frequency is going to be lower.
Now,
Let's
longer
see how well we
antenna
did.
means lower frequency. That's
Okay.
one of those
I don't know if
basic,
you can see it now, but it dropped down to 1.5. And can anybody read that frequency for me? 134.54 is approximately where the resonance is. Remember, you made this long.
so we'd rather not use this
So if I-
antenna,
if
the
I
2 meter
deviate
band.
from the natural resonant frequency of this antenna, everything changes. As you can see, if I change it, you can see the needles moving. Right. So I can go below that and above that.
Next slide.
There's just one frequency
Next
that's
slide.
a sweet spot that it really, really likes.
Thank you.
All right? We want to move on to a better
Yes,
antenna?
so now the next question on the slide is, if that antenna is too long because it's tuned too low, what do I need to do to it in order to make it tuned to the edge of the 2 meter band, say 144 megahertz? We should shorten it, and by how much should we shorten it? Well, the thing to ask is, these are proportional, inversely proportional, the length and the frequency. So that, the frequency I want is 144. I'm measuring 134 now with his meter. How many megahertz change do I want? From 134 up to 144 is 10 megahertz. I want to cause that antenna to tune up 10 megahertz. 10 is a part of 144. It's a pretty good part. It's about 7.5%. So as a first estimate, I want to decrease the length of this thing by about 7.5%. These things work.
Half of that for either end.
Half of that for either end, or that amount for the feeder. So yeah, about half of that amount for either end. So that amount of change is 3 inches for a half wave, or 1.5, if I cut off 1.5 inches off each end, I should see a change in the resonant frequency of the antenna. So here happens to be one, cut 3 inches shorter from left to right. The feeder is also short.
Any cutter, so he's just going with the second antenna.
Yeah, I just brought a second antenna. So this is made the same way, simply 3 inches shorter for the dipole length. And the transformer in the, so Henry's going to check and see if we did our calculations right, see what frequency this antenna now
Okay.
works at.
Where I left this at was where it was resonant on the other antenna. If you notice, we're greater than 5 on the SWR here, right?
But
You guys see that?
incident, let me disturb just a minute, Henry. The quartermaster has closed intake of money right now so they can do their arithmetic, right? Right?
So I'm just gonna leave, I've gotta take off.
Sure.
Get for work, I'm gonna leave it with Steve, so.
Thanks to Steve for being the person to take in the money, but we're basically closed the intake of funds for the raffle today. And then at 9 o'clock, we'll actually do the raffle.
Steve, did you get your 5-finger discount?
Okay, so Henry's checking out to see if this antenna,
Something horrible happened.
does this behave right? Well, it got disconnected.
Yeah, it's like, it got even worse than it was.
If all else fails, make sure the connections are solid.
Yeah, that's what, all right, so those saw that at 134, it's no longer resonant. Sorry, it's a pretty small scale. So now let's see if he did it right here. If he gets into the middle of the half. Oh man, Dave, this antenna's even better. About 1.2 at 143. So this would be a very effective ham radio dipole for VHF.
Be good at the bottom of the 2-meter band in particular, and it's not too bad in the middle of the band. Yeah.
So Dave did a really nice job on.
That was one cut. We could cut it. We could
I
cut it a
his,
bit more.
His transformer coupling here. When I first saw it, I said, "What the heck?" That's good, Dave.
Hey, thank you very much. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, so real quickly, probably something important to take from that is even though you're tuning to the 2-meter band, there's a sweet spot you want, say on the upper end or the lower end of the middle.
Yep. You have a preferred spot. You like it to get it.
Yeah.
You prefer the middle of the band.
Exactly.
Or you prefer 147, for example, where our repeater is. You could shorten this some more, and considerably less than you shortened it before, because we had to change it by 10 megahertz before to get up to the middle of the band. You just need to shorten it probably by an inch or so.
Yeah, and to your point over there, unless you can constantly adjust the resonant frequency of the antenna, if you want to use it over the 2-meter band, you know, the smart spot would be to go in the middle somewhere so that that'll be the perfect, and then either side of that will not be perfect unless you can adjust your antenna. So that's just kind of a compromise.
Rob.
So one of the things, sometime in the last year here, probably midsummer, I had a club member who's not here today, want some help with antennas on their car. And they were repurposing some other antennas, doing some cuts, trying to get it resonant, and it wasn't coming out quite right. 3 inches for 2 meters on this is the overall length. You got 1.5 on one side of it. Now you take that and you start adjusting a vertical antenna for your car, you got 1.5 inches to play with. It can swing you 10 megahertz.
Oh, yes.
So
Yeah, but
you can start to begin to see, yes, it's an oversimplification, but
That's just the
you
quarter
can
wave
begin
on
to
the
see, yes, quarter wavelength, so you can begin to see though that small adjustments can make a pretty wide change in how well your antenna will perform.
Perfect.
So one of the other things that they did was, because this was on top of a rather tall vehicle, they were concerned about hitting the garage, so on and so forth. So, you know, they cut the antenna shorter, but then they put in this CB coil at the bottom, spring, to spring load it, and didn't realize just how much wire is in that spring. And so not only is it, you know, a length issue there, but most of your CB springs, the coils are tight together.
Yeah.
So as the spring moves, you get intermittent connectivity on that. So it's something else to be aware of just in that little particular scenario that is fun to deal with.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The spring coils at rest should be more or less shorted, adding not much length to the antenna except whatever it's like that. But like you said, as you start to move and that resistance changes or the coil leg changes, you will see radical shifts like that, absolutely. And the other thing too is with a vehicle mounted antenna, it's still a dipole. You just have half of it sticking up here, then the metal of your vehicle is the other half of that dipole too.
Yeah, but I've yet to see anyone cut the bumper to two.
Yeah.
Michael had his hand up.
Yeah, you get the coils that have a braid, a big wide braid that goes inside the coil from the top to
The
the
shorting,
bottom, so
yeah.
it's always electrically the same,
Yep.
length when it's flexing.
Michael had a question, yes.
Dave, could you speak of the gap in between the dipole and if there's any significance there in that space to tuning your antenna?
That adds to the overall length of the antenna. It happens that the gap between these two wires here on the transmission line relates to something called the characteristic impedance that he may mention in the future of an open wire transmission line. The characteristic impedance of this would be about 500 ohms. But otherwise, there's nothing magical about this space here. Thank you. Question?
So if somebody was, So if somebody was to take the magic formula, 300 divided by the wavelength in meters, make a dipole, they don't have an antenna analyzer, is that still safe to hook up to your radio?
Probably, it might be wise to try it,
And if
cutting it a
not,
little
what do
bit,
they
because
do?
it would usually be a little bit overlong. There are some things called end effects that make the antenna effectively longer than it really measures with a tape.
Yeah. And,
You have a semi-modern radio?
1980s.
Does it have an SWR meter?
Yeah.
Okay, well, then you start on low power, right? You look at the SWR meter on the radio, which may or may not be real accurate, but you can use that as a kind of general gauge to figure out if your antenna's within spec or
Yeah,
not.
your antenna book or your radio amateur's handbook will have a formula that makes a little correction for you. Usually 468 divided by the frequency in megahertz will give it to you in feet,
Yeah.
which is helpful. It's a little better than the 300 megahertz divided by, that's the ideal theory
And
is,
the reason I mentioned that, I didn't want anybody just saying, hey, let's go by the formula, then look it up
Yeah.
by Andy-Talkie and Global.
Yeah.
Or whatever it's gonna be.
those corrections come through experience.
And there's an easy way to, if you don't remember all those numbers, is go 1, 2, 3, 4. So one leg is 2, 3, 4, 234, divided by, instead of 468.
I like that. Yeah, I
So
like that.
So,
That's cool.
for us old farts that can't remember shit.
is that the last slide, Jim?
I believe so.
Okay, the last slide has a question. How did we do? Did we succeed in shortening the antenna so we got it fairly well tuned? Okay, so we made a stab and we were pretty successful. What we could do even better, as you pointed out, to find your sweet spot.
So one thing I've liked about electronics in general is that once you understand some of the math, and I understand a little bit, and he knows a lot, but that you calculate it out, and then you go measure it, and you'd be amazed how close it is. It's amazing. It always blew my mind.
Can I just ask, so this meter, is this a pretty standard thing in everybody's toolbox then?
Only if you fork out the cash flow.
And who is the manufacturer of this meter?
Comment, yeah.
Is this an MFJ?
Comment.
or-
It's a comment.
Comment.
Yeah, they're not too bad. They're $200-something.
Okay. This
Well, I
is
mean,
nice, it's
it sounds like tuning your antennas is really a big deal, so.
if you want to
just
be,
know one guy has one and you
Yes.
just know.
Yeah,
Yes.
where do you live?
yes,
Monroe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got one, you can.
sure.
That happens quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah,
And especially, part of the club, there's a lot of people in the club that do have the meters. Just ask somebody, we're more than happy to share it. We're not using it all the time.
I just didn't know if that was something everybody buys.
Thank you.
You could, but no, it's not something everybody
If you ask
buys.
the manufacturers, yes.
John, you had a question?
Well, comments actually, on the back of my truck, I have what is called a screwdriver antenna, which essentially, the manufacturer says, listen to your signal as you tune and the coil goes up or down depending on the resonant frequency you want. And you can actually, while it's tuning or turning the coil, you can actually hear the signal level come up to the frequency that you're tuned to on the radio. Doing the cutting is essentially the same thing. It just happens to be its convenience with a rotary, with a screwdriver antenna.
Are you listening to a signal or the noise
I'm
level?
listening to a signal. I'm listening to some person talking, and I'm trying to get the largest signal report I can from him, and then I'm close to resonance.
Sometimes listening to the noise can help you too if you don't have a signal to listen to.
Right.
So if
Yeah.
you have a different location, like you're talking about the whole of Edmonds, and you plug in the same antenna, and you take the voltage, the
SWR?
SWR to see if you're getting good reception, and the only way you can tell that is if you have one of these meters.
This will be a good way to help yourself, but listening to the noise level on your radio will also help you. If you can,
And the noise level's called interference.
it is just background noise, radio noise.
And the more noise the
Yes.
better, the more noise the
But on
better.
FM, you typically do not listen to that.
Yeah, 'cause you're squelched.
Yeah, on the FM, so there's a whole lot more involved with that.
But you have to be in general for FM.
Hey,
No.
Phyllis, you made a comment about looking at the SWR in Edmonds as compared to someplace else. don't confuse the two. The SWR is measuring the resonance of the antenna. And no matter where you're at, within a couple of points of the decimal, the SWR will always remain the same. It has nothing to do with your location.
It
Okay?
doesn't,
No.
okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't have
Okay.
anything to do with the wiring of your
We
plug-in.
have a question here, but I'm aware of the fact that we have a raffle to conduct.
Okay.
Are we ready to conduct a raffle? Steve?
I'm gonna have Dennis.
Dennis, thank you.